Hey guys, hope you're all keeping well and training hard. I'm currently following my 360 mass training protocol, which consists of short daily training sessions, so it's perfect for those of you on tight schedules. You can find the full playlist for this in the description box below, as well as a link to a completely free Excel planner that I've designed to keep track of these training sessions. So before I start the video, if I could ask you to consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a thumbs up if you enjoy it or find it useful, and feel free to ask me any questions in the comment section below. One of the more common questions that I get asked is, how do I reach my genetic limit? Is it even possible? Does it exist? It's an interesting topic and one that I'm going to talk about in today's video. Unfortunately, all too often I hear guys in their late teens and early 20s claim that they've reached this muscle building ceiling, and that to surpass this they would then need to use anabolic steroids in order to grow more muscle. And more often than not, this is simply not the case. These guys have got less, in some cases, than a handful of years of training under their belts. So I've got no problem with steroid usage. I haven't ruled it out for myself, but what I do have a problem with is the following. A, personal trainers or social media influencers that lie about their drug usage, and also just gym rats or anyone that could be seen as a role model that isn't open about their anabolic usage, because it ultimately creates body dysmorphia and an unrealistic image of what's possible. B, the huge dosages of steroids used by professionals in the modern era of bodybuilding, which in my opinion has lessened the quality of the physique and ultimately the longevity of that said peak physique has worsened as a consequence. C, guys that claim that they've reached their genetic limit of muscle building and use that as an excuse to justify their anabolic steroid usage. So just to touch on point C a little bit, I think a lot of times it is naivety, especially if a guy's training isn't that effectiveness. 1 to 2 years deep into training, beginner gains have stopped, progress is almost ground to a halt, and they're thinking that's it, that's all natural bodybuilding has to offer. I've accumulated all the muscle mass I can and I've reached my genetic limit already. Then on the other hand, guys are using the natural limit as a way of justifying premature steroid usage. Instead of saying, look, I've reached my ceiling of muscle growth here, I'm going to jump on steroids, to be more honest and more open to say, I'm currently unhappy with my rate of progress as a natural, so I'm going to use steroids to speed it up. But I could still see some progress as a natural, albeit a lot more slowly. Because I think it can be quite dangerous throwing around this term genetic limit all too often, because it's going to push people towards the direction of anabolic steroids too prematurely, when in reality it will more likely just be the fact that their training sucks or their diet's really bad, they're not training hard enough. It could be a whole host of different reasons as to why they're not making the kind of progress they want. I just don't think it's a good scenario to be in, where guys are thinking that they've reached their genetic limit and are therefore considering anabolic steroids when they've reached their first training plateau or progress has slowed down a little bit after their beginner gains. It's not a good place to be in at all. I just think it's going to be extremely unlikely that you ever reach this genetic limit of muscle mass. Hypothetically, of course, it exists, but to legitimately be in a situation where you're unable to add any more muscle mass to your frame because you've already capped out your genetic limit is going to be very, very tough. You're going to have to train damn near perfectly and optimize every single variable for a very, very long period of time before you can even start to have these kind of conversations, because it'll more than likely be something that you can tweak, a variable that you can optimize before that happens. And you're certainly not going to be able to reach this genetic limit after 1, 2, 3 years of training in your late teens, early 20s, because there are many physiques that would say otherwise. Even if it took me another 3 years to add a further 50 grams of muscle mass to my frame, I still haven't capped out. I am still making progress, albeit very, very slowly. And I think that's what it comes down to. After a certain period of time, it just is genuinely difficult. But it's not as black and white as people make out. If I were to go back 15 years and do it all again without any work, without having to get up early in the morning or working late, without any stress, making sure my food was perfect, I was eating the best quality food on the planet, no injuries, no setbacks, no health issues, I guarantee you I'd be carrying more muscle mass than I am now. So that makes me a little bit hesitant to believe this natural limit, genetic muscle building limit. The problem is that after a certain period of time, the law of diminishing returns comes into play. It really does slow down to a snail's pace. After that first year or two of training, you won't ever be in a position where you'll be able to make those same kind of gains again. You can really get away with anything during this period of time. Your training doesn't have to be spot on. You don't have to worry about nutrition too much, and you'll still make fantastic progress. After some time, stimulus sensitivity and overall rate of progress reduce so much that if a trainee's program design is not good enough, or their exercise execution is out of whack, or if they're not following sound training principles, i.e. proper progressive overload, then they could be in a position where they're going to make very, very slow progress. Add to that, if their diet isn't good enough, or if their lifestyle is not conducive for anabolism, i.e. they're not sleeping enough, or they're using alcohol, recreational drugs, then they could be in a position where they're making no progress whatsoever, or even going backwards. That's why it's so difficult for most people to get out of that kind of late beginner stage / early intermediate stage. It becomes a lot harder. As I said, the law of diminishing returns really comes into play at a certain point, and every pound of muscle mass that you gain thereafter becomes exponentially more difficult to do so. To take your squat from 120 to 160 kilos requires significantly more work, more thought, and takes a greater toll on the body in general than, say, improving your squat from 60 to 100 kilos. So with this in mind, how do we get as close to this genetic limit as possible? How do we go past those beginner gains and build a really nice physique? Because most people get stuck before they attain that level as a natural bodybuilder. So in no particular order, number one, try not to get injured. Injuries compromise gains. Worst case scenario is that you can't train. You don't want to be spending time out of the gym. So try not to do anything stupid that's going to dramatically increase the risk of that. I would say more consistently err towards a lower volume routine. Overuse injuries tend to be less of a problem. Let's say hypothetically higher volume training is slightly better than lower volume training. I think that the more difficult adherence, more risk of burnout, and a higher risk of overuse injuries offset that potential increase, if there is any, over low volume training. There's no point setting yourself something with huge amounts of sets and hours spent in the gym if you're going to begrudge doing it. You're less likely to adhere to that program going forwards. This brings us on to our next point: sound training programming and principles. Try to keep it simple, stick with a few basic compound exercises, and try and get really, really good at them. Don't be tempted to swap out exercises or your entire program too prematurely. Do it for long enough that you can then make an informed decision as to whether it's actually working or not. So I could go into a lot more depth regarding this particular point: training variables, volume, intensity, frequency, advanced training techniques, but that would require a whole nother video, so I'm just going to keep it brief. Point 3 is track your training. Super important. Take a pen and paper into the gym. Make sure you're making notes as to the exercises you're doing, warm-up sets if necessary, and then you're working sets, reps, weight, any notes that you need to make a note of, or advanced training techniques used. And then you can look back when you come to training next week and see what you need to beat. It's that simple. If you're not tracking your training, then how can you progressively overload? How can you know what you're doing is working or not? So I sell a fantastic Excel training tracker. It's the best on the market in my opinion. The link is in the description box below. Check it out. Also sell a Mad Cow Excel template, which is my favourite 3-day-a-week full body program. Fantastic for good strength and size gains for natural bodybuilders. Check out that. Links in the description box. Really try to learn how to train hard as early on in your training career as possible. Learn what it takes to reach failure or just shy of it. How does that feel? The effect that it has on the body, the mental fortitude required to reach that point. Training intensity is a very, very important variable, and one that's going to make a massive difference to your rate of progress. Learn the difference between one set of 5, for example, reaching positive muscular failure, compared to 5 sets of 5 where you're leaving 1 or 2 reps in the bag each set. How's that feel? What's the difference in the psychological build-up to get yourself into a state ready enough to take that set to failure? Which is not easy, it needs to be learnt. And this brings me on to the next point, which is training form, exercise execution. Take the time to learn how to perform exercises both effectively and safely. Aim for consistency across your reps and sets and workouts. Each rep should look more or less the same as the last, albeit perhaps towards the end of the set slightly slower as you reach failure. Every set that you should perform week to week should look more or less the same. Consistency is very important. Learn how subtle changes in trajectory and grip can affect how an exercise feels and the impact that it has on the target musculature. On the other hand, try not to get bogged down too much with chasing the optimal exercise technique for all movements and keeping form absolutely perfect at all times. Learn what feels good for you. Yes, exercise technique is important and should be kept at a good level at all times and should be consistent across the sets, as I mentioned before. But I think ultimately stressing too much about this can impede your ability to train at very high intensities and with substantial amounts of weight. I just don't think it's worth it in the long run to worry excessively about exercise execution. For the next point, I'm going to talk about diet. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail as I need another video for that. I'm going to keep it simple and brief. Try to remain in a calorific surplus for as long as possible. This will help drive strength up on lifts, and ultimately that will transition into greater levels of muscle mass as a natural long term. That being said, you don't want body fat to be too high because it's going to impede your ability to train hard. Your CV fitness goes down the drain, feels uncomfortable, feels sluggish, it's not pleasant to look at. And on the other hand, you don't want it to be too low either. For me, I feel like I lose my torso rigidity, my joints kind of feel a bit brittle with super low body fats. I just don't feel like I perform well at all. So I would say a good middle range would be around 15 to 20% body fat, just enough that you have kind of a faint outline of your start muscles, and there is some separation between muscle groups and maybe a small amount of vascularity, although that depends on genetics to a certain point. I think that's a good place to be for a natural bodybuilder. Try to eat mostly home-cooked whole foods, eat varied foodstuffs, lots of different meat and carbohydrates. You don't want to be relying on just chicken breast and rice. You want other meats as well, fish and seafood and shellfish and what have you, plenty of good wholesome foods. Keep protein around about 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight. It's not that important to go super high with it. Keep carbs higher than that, considerably higher in some cases, and fat kind of low to moderate. And again, I'm not going to go into more detail than that. Just if you follow those kind of general guidelines, you're probably not going to go too far wrong. The next point is super simple, and that's don't sweat the small stuff. Spend most of your time and energy worrying about the variables that are going to have the most potential to influence your physique long term. Don't spend time thinking about aspects of your training or lifestyle that are going to have a negligible effect on that. Guys all too often come to me with questions about BCAAs, when they can have them, whether they need to eat 4 or 5 meals a day. These things aren't that important. Remember, training is the most important aspect of this journey. Without training, there is no stimulus to build muscle. It doesn't matter if your diet's perfect. Remember that. Your diet can be perfect, but if your training's whack, you're not going to see great progress. If your training's fantastic and your diet's okay, you're going to see better progress. Of course, you want both to be very good for very long periods of time, but try not to spend too much time worrying about small things that are going to have very minimal effect on your ability to build muscle long term. And it's strange how 99% of the questions I get asked are about things that are unimportant. It really does baffle me. The next point is very, very important. You must continue training at all costs. There can be no excuses for missing prolonged periods of time in the gym, albeit in the most extreme of cases. You have to have that mentality. If you're doing overtime at work, you're doing a DIY project, you're stressed at work, relative diets, it's all irrelevant. It doesn't matter. You need that focus. You need to keep moving forward, because once one excuse prevents you from training, others will follow. I guarantee it. It's like a disease that spreads in the mind. You have to stay focused. If you have an injury that prevents you from training one body part, learn to work around it. Train other body parts. Let's say you've got crippling elbow tendonitis and rotator cuff problems. Try to work around it by training maybe a little bit of back, or focus on lower body. Try the barbell squat. If that's still a problem for the elbows and shoulder, do the hack squat or leg press. If those are still a problem, then go in there and do 20 sets of quad extensions and hamstring curls. There's always something to do. You have to try to keep moving forwards. Learn the exercises and how they feel and how you can work around certain types of injuries. Try to sleep relatively well to promote good recovery. Sometimes this won't be perfect. I'm not going to put any kind of benchmarks in terms of what you should aim for, because I believe everyone's different. Some people are just wired differently. If left to their own devices with no work, no requirements to get up with an alarm clock, I believe people would sleep different lengths anyway. Some people would sleep 5-6 hours naturally and feel good and well rested. Others would be sleeping for 7, 8, 9 hours. So just try and get in a position where you're not feeling too tired, you're not feeling like you're falling asleep, before a workout. If you don't have enough time and sleep is going to be short, make sure you sleep fast. And by that I mean get yourself set up in a good environment so that it's conducive to falling asleep quickly. Don't faff about, and make sure your sleep is uninterrupted, unbroken throughout that time period, and you can go to sleep quickly. The next point, again, is very important and relates to a couple of the other points I've mentioned already. Don't let the pursuit of perfection strangle your progress. There will be times where your training, your lifestyle isn't optimal. You might have to cut your workout short. Your food and sleep will be compromised. But you have to keep moving forward and accept it, take it for what it is, and look forward to those times where the variables will align, where you can put more energy and time into your hobby. At the end of the day, life will get in the way at times, and I've spoken to too many guys that have stopped training altogether because something in their regime isn't what they conclude to be perfect, so they just don't do it. My routine at the moment is a great example of this. I'm training about 45, 50 minutes. I'm not sleeping a lot, but I'm still getting it done. Remember, 3 sessions of 20 minutes a week, you're going to be infinitely better off than doing nothing. You could do dips and chins on day 1, superset. Day 2, you could do overhead press and abs. And day 3, you could do squats. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you could do 10 minutes of fast-paced interval running on Tuesday and Thursday. And if you're fairly good with your diet, you're going to have a good physique. You just have to make the best out of a bad situation at times. Don't let it get in your head and affect this mentality where everything has to be perfect, because it's just not real. Adding recovery work and cardio to your regime, this will help longevity and training health. You'll be able to perform movements more easily. Barbell squat, for example, if you do your stretching, your foam rolling, especially early on, you'll be in a position where it will just be more comfortable for you to perform. You get less injuries, or less likely to become injured and deal with issues that are stemmed from tightness, basically. So any action that helps promote recovery between sessions, your stretching, your foam rolling, ice baths, cold shower, soft tissue work, it's all helpful. At the end of the day, I don't believe in overtraining whatsoever. I believe in under-recovery. Secondly, your cardio, very, very important for general health. At the end of the day, you're not going to be in a good position to build muscle mass if you're not healthy. It will allow you to train harder as well, especially in the moderate to high rep ranges, which are very important at times, especially on movements like squat. They're going to require a decent CV system, so make sure you add that in. Try your best not to get bogged down with all of the conflicting information on social media and the internet. Be assertive yet open-minded with your training principles. A lot of the times, especially on social media, posts will be outrageous or extreme to try and gather more traction. So bear that in mind. Just try your best to kind of sift through the garbage and find the good stuff. Eventually, you'll be able to do that more easily with more experience. Also, try not to compare yourself to others, especially on social media. Unfortunately, you will encounter people that will be dishonest about their steroid usage, and it may ruin your motivation and throw you off course. As they say, comparison is the thief of joy, and that is definitely the case with bodybuilding, 100%. So just enjoy your journey, focus on yourself. This next point will speed this process up dramatically and help you get to where you want to more quickly, and that's to hire a good coach. Let them guide you through the process so you can enjoy being an athlete and enjoying that aspect of it without having to worry about organisation and planning and sifting through all that information that I spoke about in the last point. It will save you a lot of frustration and a lot of energy and time. Last but not least is to have patience. It truly is a virtue. This is going to be a long journey whatever way you go about it, so you might as well enjoy that process. Don't get me wrong, you can achieve a fantastic transformation in a relatively short period of time, but to build a large muscular body as a natural lifter, it's going to take a few years, so enjoy that process. Try not to get frustrated with the experience, even if you hit a plateau for quite some time. Just persevere, grit your teeth, push through it, enjoy the process, and eventually You'll come out the other end not just for better physique, but you'll be a better person for it as well. Now, while you may never reach your true muscle building limit, you can strive to get as close to it as possible as quickly as you can by following some of these pointers. If you want to go down the route of steroids to accumulate more muscle mass more quickly, then that's fine, go for it, but just be honest and open as to the reasons why to yourself and others. Rest assured, it's more than likely not because you've reached your natural muscle building limit. Remember, any progress is progress, no matter how small. So I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you did, then please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to see more content. If you've got any ideas about future videos or any questions for me, then leave them in the comment section below. Also, check out my website. I offer online coaching exclusively for natural lifters, a range of different programs, as well as Excel trackers, really in-depth stuff that are going to help you track your journey as a natural lifter. So check them out. Let me know what you think of the video. Stay strong.